I cannot believe that I get to look this way and eat that much food. And in the midst of all of this, I really have just been like pounding away at the hypertrophy work. There's been sprinkles of strength, there's been sprinkles of power with kettlebell ballistics, but I really went hard on prioritizing the hypertrophy work. And now I'm at a point as I came out of the deficit going into the reverse, I've been focusing more so on strength because I know I'm not eating enough calories to really see that big of a change from a muscle standpoint. Welcome back to the Dangerous Women podcast. I'm your host, Colleen, and I am bringing back registered dietitian Hillary Ervin, which I don't know if you know this. If this is the first time you're listening to the show, you might not know this, but Hillary has actually been coaching me since 2021. She came into my life because even though I'm a fitness professional, you know, I might be an expert when it comes to kettlebells, but nutrition is not something I am an expert at. And I found myself at this point in time where I was gaining weight. I had tried doing keto because my best friend did keto. My best friend had her husband doing keto. Tim started doing keto with me, and everybody was like crushing it on keto. And then I felt like I was dying. And I was like, you know what? I can't do this anymore. You know, I had already been out of my eating disorder in recovery for almost 8 years at this point. And I was like, I'm not going back there. And this diet stuff isn't working. I need to find the expert to help me. So I reached out to Hillary, and our journey started at the beginning of 2021. I had a goal of getting ready for a photo shoot for my book, Kettlebell Catalyst. And I had never tracked macros, only calories before. And I said to Hillary, I need to lose some body fat. Help me. What do we do? And that's where Hillary comes in. So, Hillary, when we first got started, what did we do?
I am just in awe. First, thinking back to the fact that we started together in 2021, that just blows my mind. And I remember when we very first started working together that you were kind of in that space with keto, right? And obviously that's frustrating to follow a diet where other people are seeing results, but I would guess that with keto and the way that you train and then your body composition goals, like it was just not giving you what you wanted. And when we first started working together, we did have a shorter timeline, right? For when we started to when you had your photo shoot. And that kind of changes the way that we approach things because as you've experienced in, kind of previous seasons or phases that we've been in, we like to lay that like nice groundwork of day-to-day eating and getting those like really good foundations built. You had a timeline for a very big and specific thing that you were working towards.
It
Like,
was 12 weeks. I was like,
Mhm.
I have 12 weeks to do this. And leading up to this, I just came off of the past year doing everything for the Guinness Book of World Records.
Yep.
So a lot of my training was focused around endurance work, doing stuff with the Turkish getup. I definitely had some like strength pieces in my training, but I was not doing isolated hypertrophy work.
Yeah, your training style is definitely different then as well. And so we jumped kind of like right into this 12-week phase. And because of the timeline and the end goal that we had, the approach was different than approaches that we've taken previously, where we did have to be a little bit more rigid, more aggressive. And while I think the outcome was really great,
It was.
it's really tough to jump right into a diet like that. And then it's also, I would say, like almost more challenging to figure out what to do after because everything about your eating is flipped upside down. And what's like normal or healthy also gets a little bit murky. So I'm really glad that we were able to keep together and keep building and keep working on things, because look at where we're at today. But that just jumping into things it's tough.
I would never recommend to anyone just jump on in. I think there was a part of me that thought, this is just like a one-time thing. And once I go into this cut, I'm going to be able to maintain everything. And that wasn't really the case. And it's been so interesting because, the clients that me and Hillary work with together, nobody has ever been like, Colleen, I need to get ready for a photo shoot. We just don't share any of those clients. And, they all tell me when I get started with Hillary, it's all about finding, healthy eating habits and maintenance and doing all of these things that we had 2 weeks where you asked me to just like track what I was initially eating. And I think the first week I didn't understand that you're supposed to track everything. So it was kind of like these rough guesstimations. And you were like, and you, something that I love so much about you, Hillary, is you were so kind in the way of explaining we need to do this again and we need to do it better without shaming. I've never felt shamed in working with you. And that's one of the things that has always mattered a lot to me because of my history having overcome an eating disorder. And I think before we say anything else in this episode, if you are not currently in a good place with your mental health, this might not be the episode for you because we're about to talk specifically about numbers. And in order to do this and feel good about it, you do need to be in a healthy mental headspace. When I first started tracking this stuff and you were like, we need to do it a little bit better, I remember thinking, okay, so if I like need to do everything very specifically, or she's not going to change my calories. She's not going to change my macros. And I think that was really eye-opening for me because in my head, I was like, we have 12 weeks to get ready for this photo shoot. And if I'm not listing everything for 1 week, you don't have the confidence to then cut my calories. And I think there were a few weeks in that initial block where things just didn't change because I wasn't on top of my shit. But it's like you also you're not living with me. You don't know exactly what's going on. So if you don't have these notes, you as the practitioner, it's I don't feel good about telling my client to eat less if I don't know the full story. I'm kind of like projecting that on you. I don't know if that's correct.
No, that's absolutely correct. And I think it's really tricky, right? Because when you're putting food into the app and like someone else is seeing it, there can be those very like conflicting feelings of, oh, I shouldn't have had that, or maybe I should have had less of whatever food. Where I've always tried to say this with love and in a way that doesn't sound like I don't care, but like I don't really care that much about what you're eating, in the sense that if you are having, I don't know, like chocolate or cookie or ice cream, I don't care in in the fact that I know you're getting all of your nutrition elsewhere, and those foods are okay. And as you've experienced, they can absolutely have a place in a deficit or maintenance or surplus. They can have a place in all of those phases. It just, the how much and kind of the strategy changes. But to that, collecting data as accurately and consistently as possible is really valuable. And I don't want to mistake that with being perfect, because those two aren't the same things. Consistency and perfection, in my eyes, are not the same. But that value with being consistent and trying to, capture everything to the best of your ability is helpful for a few reasons. One, just gives us like an accurate, or as accurate as possible, idea of everything that you're consuming. And the other piece that I see is it helps us to avoid unnecessary decreases to your intake. And as a result, that helps with adherence. Because let's say that you're tracking almost everything in your deficit phase, your diet phase, right? You're almost everything, but maybe there's 200 or 300 calories on a daily basis that are not accounted for. And I don't know that, or maybe you're not even aware. And if, we then go to make a decrease, we're making this additional decrease unnecessarily, and we still have that unaccounted for, which then typically makes the decrease even more difficult to adhere to. So just capturing everything can help us to make more educated adjustments and decreases the likelihood that, intake will be cut lower than necessary. And I think it just feels a lot better mentally as well. And and tracking everything can also maybe help to over time remove those feelings or the narrative that you have around different foods that maybe feel like bad or off limits. Because then you can see, oh, hey, like this actually works. This is okay. And it's not going to be, the showstopper to me moving forward. In fact, I would argue that for a lot of folks, including those foods on occasion can actually help with seeing progress and then maintaining, because it's not this, I'm going to restrict whatever thing for 12 weeks, and then I'm going to get to the 12 weeks, then I'm going to just enjoy it as much as possible. Like that kind of black and white thinking is oftentimes not experienced in the same way.
And I don't even think I picked up necessarily on that until I was doing more work in therapy. And that was coming around the time after we had done a second cut together. I was going into maintenance and I was getting ready to go into my first surplus with you. And it was cool because when my mindset shifted, I felt like I had so much more freedom with food. And I would say, getting into a surplus, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, you do realize there's a lot more freedom. There's still structure that we need to find, but there's a lot more space for playing with food and enjoying it. But okay, so I want to keep us focused in on that first deficit a little bit longer. We had about 12 weeks. For those of you who have never met me in person, I am 5'6", and I believe when we first started, I believe my weight was around 141 pounds. And at this point in time, I had been training with kettlebells for a good chunk of time, like about 4, 5, maybe not 5. Oh, I'm going to throw out about 4 years at this point. But the work that I had been doing was not focused in on hypertrophy. So I was strong and I had some gnarly endurance, but I really hadn't taken a whole lot of time to specifically build muscle, let alone fuel to build muscle. And I want to say, and I don't know if you have this number, but when we finished my cut, I believe my weight was around like 128. And we definitely saw a noticeable change in my body composition. And I remember being psyched about it at the time. And when we finished, I remember it was like the day of my photo shoot. And once those pictures were taken, I went out and I like went hard on nachos and all of these things that I was like, I can't eat this. And truth be told, I think looking back, I could have figured out how to still enjoy a lot of foods. I was just so nervous in terms of tracking foods that I kept sticking to things that were like simple to track. I didn't do any recipes because that felt overwhelming. I was still trying to get comfortable with my food scale. It was very overwhelming. And what's so great is I had access to Hillary and we were doing all of these written check-ins. I kind of wish that we were like hopping on calls at the time. I feel like that could have set me up for a lot more success in the beginning. But anyways, we got to this point, right? And I think in the beginning, sometimes we overlook how easy it is to track food. And, it can be challenging, especially, going on trips or people coming to visit you or, a holiday coming up and you wanting to go out to eat. But if you don't know how to do it in the midst of being in a deficit or working with macros, it can feel, well, fuck it. And I was finding myself either avoiding going out or telling Tim, I can't do this, we can't do this. we're not going here, we're not going there because I need to be on top of my food. And at the time, I didn't know how to do it. And I didn't want to reach out to Hillary every single time to be like, hey, help me. I don't know what I'm doing. And I know now if I had, Hillary would have helped me. But I think what I have learned is life is always going to happen. And we are social beings. And something that is so helpful in working with Hillary in the midst of life happening is saying, so how do I navigate this so you don't have to feel like, well, I have to wait for 3 months when I don't have any events going on so that I can like actually go into this deficit and have success. But how, I don't even remember off the top of my head, but do you remember anything in that first cut where maintenance calories started and where we dropped them to in that first cut?
I'm trying to think about like where calories ended up.
I want to say
And
it's like 2000 in the very beginning.
I would say I think like around 2000 is a pretty close number, especially based on like you coming from keto and knowing fats are more calorie dense, they bring a little bit more to the table. So I'm trying, like thinking back, we did have to get quite low calorically and get to a number that is really difficult to adhere to. And it's absolutely a number, especially for you, that you don't want to stay with long term. And I think we were around like 12 to 1300 calories, which is very low calorie, especially for you. And of course, like that absolutely shifts your eating, right? Like that level of restriction is, it's hard. This is kind of, there's no way to go around that. But it's also one of those things where again, it's like it's a short-lived time. And one of the things that I've really worked to do over time is make sure that like when we're in a deficit or you're restricting your intake is being very clear on what behaviors are like diet phase behaviors and what behaviors are like life, like you keep with you long term, because that piece can get pretty murky. The thing with eating out at events and stuff, of course, like we can try to plan a deficit to be at maybe a time where you know that there's less travel or there's less things going on. Like planning a deficit from like November on is probably not the best time, just given everything that goes on. But even if you do plan it during like the ideal time, life still happens. Like we have visitors, people come to town, there's events, our fridge breaks, who knows, like things happen. So that kind of goes back to the benefit of laying that really good framework before you jump into that diet phase, where we were able to do that afterwards. And that helps you so that you can have that framework and then know, okay, hey, like these are maybe the big ticket items that I have to make adjustments to bring calories down. So like swaps that you can make or things like that so that you can still go out and live your life and eat at restaurants or go to events and see progress without feeling just stuck.
Yeah. And I think that is such an important piece for people to understand, especially if this is something that you are serious about doing and doing in a healthy way. You know, when we finished that first cut, there was a part of me that, number one, I was like, okay, so now I can eat whatever I want and I'm going to keep my body looking like this. And that's not exactly what happened. I remember after the first cut, I didn't track things the same way. I was definitely using food to emotionally regulate. There would be times I would find myself like later at night going
Mhm.
into the pantry and just like grabbing a handful of chips or like a handful of dried fruit or something. And for me, like that's all it took to, put some more weight back on. It wasn't like I was eating a crazy amount of extra food consciously. It was almost like I'm in this mode where mentally I'm just looking for some type of distraction, some type of comfort where it feels like everything is just kind of shut off. And a handful, night after night, it just added up for me. And I remember asking you, when can we do a cut again? And I probably asked you like a month or 2 months later because I saw how the scale was trending, and you were like, we gotta wait. And we didn't do it until the top of the next year. And at some point, something clicked to me in that time period where I was like, I don't think my training is really in alignment with building muscle. Because at the time, I was like, I'm doing the strength stuff. I just wrapped all these Turkish get-ups. I'm done with endurance. I'm like, I really need a pivot. And that was also around the time I started training at the barbell. Are you ready to start building strength, but feel overwhelmed by complicated workouts and influencers on social media? Foundations is your answer. If you're new to strength training and want a simple, effective way to get stronger, build muscle, and drop body fat, Foundations was designed just for you. What you'll need to get started are just 3 kettlebells. That's it. These 3 kettlebells are all you need to unlock your strength, start building muscle, and start seeing real results. There's no fancy moves, no complicated routines, just the basics that will help you to progress safely and confidently. What you'll get when you join: simple, proven exercises where you will master foundational movements like squats, deadlifts, and presses that will give you strength and confidence. A progressive training program, step-by-step video and written guidance to help you improve no matter where you are starting from. A safe, effective training routine. You'll get to focus on form and build a body that's strong from the inside out. And the best part, it's DIY. You can start right away, no waiting around. You just buy the program today and you get to start building strength from the comfort of your home. You don't need to be fancy to get strong. You just need a solid foundation and the right approach. Foundations is perfect for the woman who is new to strength training and wants to take it at her own pace. She wants to feel empowered, she wants to feel strong, and she wants to feel more confident in her body. If you're ready to begin, visit www.colleenconlon.com for more details and grab your Foundations program today. Again, all you need are 3 kettlebells. I'll take care of the rest.
Yes, I remember. This is, I think, a great point to add in is, do your goals match what you want, or the goals like what you think you should have, right? And I remember us having those conversations, and there is that pivot we made where you were like, wait, I want to do something else. And we shifted, and I feel like from that point is when things like really did change, when you had that pause and you're like, no, this isn't my goal. Let's do this. And you've kept moving on that path. So I think that's a really good reminder too, that making sure, hey, my goals are like what I want, not what I think I should do or what's like expected of me.
Yeah.
Do I want to do this?
For me, training in the hardstyle kettlebell community, there were a lot of people that I was following or interacting with on social media, and the focus really is, strength, doing these like 1 rep max efforts. And, I've talked about this before on the podcast. Just because you're strength training doesn't mean your strength training is in alignment with the type of result that you are looking for. And I saw plenty of, women on social media who were training to build muscle and have a specific physique, but I didn't see a lot of people who were training with kettlebells doing the same thing. And, I think for me at the time, I had to get the barbell because I had outgrown strength for certain exercises. Like I needed something heavier to deadlift than a 48-kilo bell or 2 48-kilo bells. And it was like, okay, this is one of those times where we're going to have to make this pivot. And I happened to live in a space where I was able to do that. But what was kind of cool about how everything worked out is you told me we can't go into a cut until X amount of time passes. And I decided I'm going to change my training style. And now we're living in maintenance mode. And it gave me an opportunity to start building some more muscle.
Yes.
Why did we have to wait as long as we waited? I think we had wrapped around March, and it wasn't until next January that we went into a cut.
So there's a lot of different factors that come into play and thinking like for you specifically. First, like your goals, the aesthetic shifts too, like thinking about like there's changes in shape and like seeing your muscles and that part of it, like that requires building muscle mass. And we know it takes time. It doesn't happen in a few weeks. Like it just takes time. So that was a big factor, is just allowing you to have that time training. The other big thing was laying that groundwork, kind of laying that better groundwork and learning how to be in maintenance, or just kind of like living your life intake, which I honestly think for most people is the most difficult place to be at, because you're not looking for the scale to go down. You're not looking for it to go up. You're just kind of you're cruising along. And so the validation that you can get from the scale going up or down in other phases, like it's not there. And the other type of like progress that you see may not be like numerical. So that part can be challenging, whether it's like in the gym or scale, body fat, things like that. And it can be a little more challenging to just track where you're at and kind of how you're doing. But we spent a lot of time in that space. And I think when you are in that space, there's a lot of trial and error. You got to experiment a little bit more with like food and travel and get your footing. And the other thing is that if we are, trying to diet every few months, it's really hard on our body. And I think it's also really hard on your mind and your relationship with food. And it really makes things so, so cloudy. Even if you are aware of the variances in the behaviors, like it starts to become really murky on what's normal and okay versus what's like a restricted behavior. And oftentimes when folks are trying to like diet every few months, the rate of progress is a lot slower, adherence is a lot more challenging, and oftentimes you see like calories have to go down lower to see that kind of like progress that they're wanting. And then when it ends, there's generally like that bigger kind of rebound, like a swing in the other direction, because there was so much restriction and you didn't give your body or mind that break. So I think that's like a multi-purpose reason why we stayed kind of in the existing space. And I think that also brings up kind of a good point that when you're kind of in living your life values, you can still see composition shifts. Like you can still see changes in your body. Granted, they don't usually happen really quickly, or they may not be like totally obvious, but over time you can totally see changes if your training and your nutrition are steady. And they don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be like spot on, but if you're steady and your training is supporting your nutrition, vice versa, like you can still see changes happen. So it's not like this spot where you're just kind of like in a holding pattern, waiting for what's next.
And the other thing, in the midst of doing this stuff and like starting to get comfortable with the barbell is, something I think we don't always realize when you necessarily make the leap from using one modality to another is the skill acquisition and the neurological adaptations that need to take place. Like your body needs to get comfortable now moving a little bit differently before we can really start, seeing results on your progressive strength training program. So it was really kind of cool how we were in this maintenance with nutrition while I was learning this new skill set.
Yes, and your brain had the fuel to learn that new skill set, because as we know, like the further you get into a deficit, your brain it is not operating on all cylinders. Like you become slower. Like all this talking with my hands that I'm doing, that starts to happen less. You slow down. So being in a deficit, not the greatest time to learn a new skill like barbell training.
No. And then, okay, so now we're in January. We're in January. This is our second cut. I fucking crushed this cut. I wasn't going to let anything stop me because now I understood the name of the game. You have to, you have to do well enough with your tracking that Hillary is going to feel confident to give you a decrease. So I was on top of it. I wasn't going to let anything knock me. And I want to say going into this, I think do you know what my weight was?
I think you're in the like 130s, like
Okay.
mid 130s.
Okay. And then I think we got down,
I think you're in the low 120s.
okay. I crushed this and this was also when I started taking creatine, L-glutamine, BCAAs. This is when we started really being specific with pre-workout timing. I was fueling out. This is like when I started eating candy in my workouts. I had a couple of moments where PRs were happening in the midst of the
Yes.
deficit, which was great. I got a 32-kilo snatch while we were in the beginning
Mhm.
of the deficit, not the end, but in the beginning, which was wild. It was wild. Anyways, so we end this one, and I remember a couple of things were going on at this time. One, I felt really small in my body. I even had somebody reach out, like making a comment about the size of my butt, and that made me really sad. And I know this person like was coming at it from like a kind place, but it made me feel insecure. And then I remember having a moment where I was, being intimate with Tim and my thong just fell off of my body. And that made me feel like, okay, you know what? Maybe it would be really great to have more muscle on my body. I was also going through a lot of personal stuff at this point in time. I was in therapy 3, sometimes 4 times a week doing intense EMDR work. It was a really challenging point in time. I remember trying so much to adhere to the nutrition pieces that Hillary was giving me to come out of this reverse diet phase, but there were moments where I just could not adhere to it because of what was going on in my personal life. And the stuff going on in my personal life just topped my nutrition priorities. And that's okay.
Yep.
It's life.
Mhm.
Sometimes stuff happens. But I remember around that time into the fall, I was like, fuck it, I'm doing a surplus. Like I want to build up my butt. I want more muscle on my body. I'm ready to do this. And in my head at the time, I was like, okay, I've been strength training for like 6.5 years at this
Mhm.
point. So I'm not new anymore. And I remember, trying to do a little bit more research in terms of, so what's realistic in terms of like actually building muscle at what rate? And I remember seeing stuff around newbie gains, and I was like, okay, well, I'm not new anymore. So it's going to be harder to put on muscle than it could be if I was on top of my nutrition, if I was on top of my training program right in the beginning. So I decided I'm going to try doing a surplus. And I remember talking to Hillary about it and feeling scared because I didn't know what was going to happen. But I also felt really confident knowing I've already done 2 cuts with Hillary. And I know after we do this, I'll get to go into a cut. I had seen all of these women on social media who were talking about you bulk, you cut. It's like something that we do. And I'm able to see this can work, but I'm also so aware at this point in time that the strategy matters. And at this point, especially after this last cut with Hillary, I was like, fuck it, I can do this. And I have Hillary to guide me. And I feel really confident with my training at this point. So I asked if we could do it. And January, we began. Can you explain what that looked like from a nutrition standpoint?
I was so excited when you wanted to go into the surplus and spend time just existing with more food. First, it is really freaking scary because even though like we logically know like we have gone through diet phases and deficits in the past and seen progress, there's still like that fear that what if I, do this and I can't lose the weight that I gained, or like I'm stuck like this, or, just that piece. And then, I mean, and you could probably agree, like, even when you are like, you are mentally in a space to be in a surplus, and you feel good, like there are still days where it is a mind fuck to see your body and it feels like very foreign. And if you're just having a really crappy day and you also just see yourself and you're just like feeling uncomfortable, that's hard. Like it is really challenging, even when you know it's not forever, there's a plan and things are moving along. Like it's still really hard. But I know I was super excited because when we think of like the gaining of your gaining muscle mass and changing like body shape, that was so supportive of those goals. And I know you experienced just like having a lot more flexibility and freedom to play with different foods. You were cooking all sorts of, didn't you cook octopus?
I did.
You were just like on these food adventures, and it was really fun to see, especially knowing just like everything you have gone through, like with your relationship with food and self, like you cooking octopus and like trying all these foods it was just really exciting to see for me too. But with the surplus, there's a lot of like different things to think about. For some folks, like they feel more comfortable not going into as much of a surplus as we did, where they maybe go a little bit over and hang out there, knowing that, hey, like progress in maybe like building muscle mass or some of the other goals that they have may be slower. You and I chose kind of a moderate, kind of middle of the ground approach for the surplus. And we also we spent time. We spent a good chunk of time in there.
6 months.
Yep. So that while we did know, yes, there was a gain in body fat, we also had time for you to like also gain muscle mass because as we said at the beginning, gaining muscle takes time, especially when you're not a novice lifter. So if you think of, I'm just going to use an example of a 150-pound person. If you think about weight gain per week, we're usually looking at zero point 0.4 to 0.75 pounds per week. Some weeks maybe less, some weeks maybe more, but usually it's about like 0.25 to 0.5% of that body weight gain per week. And again, some people like it feels better to go slower and less. Other people, they like to kind of live on the higher end of the range. But that also kind of clues us into the value, if so long as you're in a good space to weigh yourself daily, because that gives us the idea to see, we can see trends and changes. One of the challenges that can come, whether you're in a deficit, maintenance, surplus, and you're weighing randomly, kind of like maybe Wednesday on this week, Thursday next, Saturday, you're just kind of all over the place. We get data, right? But it could be a day after you had sushi and you had more sodium, or a really tough workout and you're just more sore and inflamed. So what you did a great job in doing is having those daily weights so that we could see trends versus kind of these random snapshots in time, which helped us to then kind of evaluate. The other thing that no, I know you and I talked about was like, when do we stop this? Like, when do we stop calories, right? And I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Being in a surplus takes work. Like
It's
it
hard.
is fun to eat more food, but when you get to a certain point, it takes conscious effort to still get the nutrition that your body needs for like health and then get those additional calories. You really do have to put a lot of effort. It's also can be kind of costly as well. And that's one of those things, again, we think about with where do we stop calorically? There is that there's that challenge with getting more food, but we don't want it to be a miserable experience. And then we also think about like your comfort levels. We know that there's going to likely be some kind of discomfort in how you're feeling, but we also, again, like, don't want you to feel miserable.
Yeah. You know, once we started working together, I've been weighing myself in every day since then, with the exception of travel. But the weigh-ins have been so helpful just to really understand those trends. And I know a younger version of me coming off of having had an eating disorder, having not done that mental health work yet, I would not have been able to do that. But given where I was at when I started my journey with Hillary, totally doable and just learning how to use the scale as a tool. And it's been interesting, I understand now with my body when I do almost every single time, if I have 2 glasses of alcohol, it doesn't matter what I've eaten for the day, my scale will trend up about 5 pounds. It's just kind of like clockwork at this point. So that's been really cool to see. The surplus, I mean, when we had done that last cut, I was in the low 120s. I got to the low to mid 150s. And it was really cool to get to experiment with the food. But to Hillary's point, when we got to, I don't know, maybe the last 2 months, it was really hard to make sure I was hitting everything. And that's where strategy comes into play. And yeah, I mean, I thought at certain points in time, being in a surplus was actually harder than being in a deficit to make sure the numbers are still in alignment. And I don't know if we talked about this part yet. And for anybody who's unfamiliar with tracking macros, regardless of being in a deficit or in a surplus, you don't just give a number and that's what we're working with for X amount of time. Like anytime I've been in a cut with you, it's typically we're here for maybe, 2 weeks, maybe even a month. And maybe we can talk about that after we go into the last cut that we just did after the surplus. But the surplus too, it was like you gave me values for sometimes it was every 2 weeks is what I want to say, but calories got up to, I actually tried to check this recently and I use my macros, the app My Macros to track my stuff. And I realized it only saves your data for like X amount of months and then it's gone. Because Hillary, I've tracked everything for years now, but it hasn't saved all of my stuff. So I think I saw my calories topping in at the end of the surplus around 2,800. Does that sound right to you?
Yes, I know we were getting close to like the 3,000 calorie mark with you at the end of the surplus.
And what was really helpful was knowing this has a deadline. And you
Mhm.
had told me in the beginning, once we see you trending on the scale around 150, you're done. Can you explain to us why?
Like, why 150? Well, I want to first note, like when we think about that number, it is very dependent on the person. When we look at like that 150 for you specifically, we're thinking about just like your frame, your your goals overall in that fat loss phase moving forward, your level of comfort, and knowing that yes, in a surplus we are going to see, body fat gain, but we don't want to get to this point where it's, I want to say an unnecessary amount of body fat gain. And so kind of seeing how things evolved over time, it became, pretty clear that, hey, like going much higher than that, it's not going to yield like a net positive for you in terms of muscle growth, seeing your body different when you finish your cut. And then also like thinking about the mental strain, that physical strain of it. Because I mean, a lot of things do shift when you gain body fat.
Bigger. That was
That was one for you. But like from the training standpoint, like your mechanics are different. Like you move differently and you might just feel different in day-to-day life. So looking at like how much are we comfortable with kind of losing or needing to lose to get to the end goal that you had? What's healthy mentally, physically? And then was it worth it to go higher? No, like in my opinion, it wasn't for you. So it's just a lot of taking in our conversations and seeing where you were at and how you were feeling and looking at those end goals that we wanted to look at things. And if we were to math it out, I do feel really confident that that rate of gain is what we saw. It was aligned with where we'd want it to be over those kind of six-ish months, if you will. We went back and looked at notes.
It was great. The whole experience for me overall was something I'm so grateful that I took the time to do, especially given my background with food and having had so many years where it was not healthy and just seeing it in a particular way. And this experience was really eye-opening for me, just seeing like how fun food can be, having different experiences, just like Friday night movie nights with my husband, where it's we're gonna make quesadillas and we're gonna have popcorn and we're gonna have dessert was just a really fun moment in our relationship that we didn't really get to do on the regular before because of how I had viewed food. So that was really fun. And seeing how my body changed, having larger breasts, having a bigger butt, like that was also fun. And it changed the way that I was dressing myself for that period of time. I started experimenting more with skirts and dresses and jewelry. And I felt very feminine in my body, which was really cool and I didn't expect. And truth be told, I was gravitating towards skirts because as my body was changing, like skirts would move with me. My jeans, my yoga pants weren't doing that. And I was like, I can't just keep buying more pants. So I'm going to find something that I can stay in for this period of time. And it ended up being really fun to experiment with. And truth be told, I feel like it was the summer of the surplus that I really started to feel like I went from girl to woman. And I think there's more to it. There's definitely stuff I was working on in my mental health journey as well, but having that physical change was really cool for me. And I can clearly say, like, after that summer, I felt like there was a clear transition. When you wake up on your birthday and you're just like, is anything different? And a lot of times it's no. The summer of my surplus, yeah, life was different after that. So we wrapped the surplus, and I remember being like, so now what do? We didn't go right to a cut. We went to maintenance. So why did we do that?
A lot of the reasoning behind like why we didn't go from surplus to cut is like a big mental piece of it. There might be others that think about the approach a little bit differently. I oftentimes, consider the fact that if we go from surplus right to deficit, it can feel a little bit, I want to feel like a punishment, like that living in that surplus was a bad thing, and there's this rush to get out of it. The other big piece is the way in which you're approaching eating is so different in a surplus than how you would in a deficit. And it's different than what you do in just kind of day-to-day life and when you're maintaining. So learning how to shift from those different periods and what kind of eating, training, sleep, all of those things look like, and kind of revisiting that groundwork, that foundation that you built so then you can move into the next phase, I think is really important. Because again, going from a surplus and then going right into a deficit, the eating behaviors, patterns, foods, all of it it's different. And it's very jarring to go from one end of the spectrum to the other. And then then think about, okay, well, what happens after the deficit when we haven't had that time to be in our just living life phase. It makes it difficult to then come out of the deficit because the time before that you were in a surplus where eating behaviors were different. So it's a lot of I think the mental piece of it is really important to consider in going in between the different phases.
I remember being a little like frustrated when you told me that we were going to have to like take the time to go to maintenance before the deficit. But what I didn't know would happen is weight just started coming off on its own. I think we spent, and correct me if I'm wrong, about 3.5 months going from surplus into finding maintenance before we went into that last cut. And in that time, like slowly, 10 pounds like came right off of my body. Eating a lot of food, or at least what felt like a lot of food to
Yeah,
I had been used to.
maybe more than you expected to be eating in order to see weight loss.
Yeah. So that was cool. And then once we went into deficit mode, again, it was like a really gradual thing. And I went into this deficit at the time of the year that you would probably never want to be in one. But again, I was able to do this just given where I'm at in life
Mhm.
and a lot of the personal choices around holidays with me, Tim, and family. I didn't have a lot of things going on where I was going to be at things like holiday parties. And I felt good knowing I'm going to take this time, I'm going to go into a cut, and it's not going to feel like it really sucks. I mean, I think to an extent, like when you're in a deficit, especially like the tail end, it does kind of suck. But the thing to remember is this isn't how you're living. This is temporary. Is it a sacrifice? Yeah. And if you care about that goal, then you're going to do it. It's not to say you have to. Nobody has to do any of this stuff. It's something that you're volunteering to do if you don't want that specific result. And again, everything was really gradual. You cut me down. Yeah, you cut me down. Where did we end up ending? And it was like a month. I want to say we were around this value.
I 13 to 1400 calories. We hung out.
It was interesting because I remember in December, I was like, fuck this. I don't look different. I don't look the way I want. And I was getting really angry. I was like, this stupid fucking surplus. And then the calorie cuts started getting, more intense. And Hillary had told me, this is the day it ends. We are not going past this. How many weeks were we technically in the deficit?
We we ended up extending your deficit. We went a little bit longer and we were around like 16 to 20-ish weeks. I want to say we ended up extending it. And there's a few things that I think are important to speak to with that, the extension. First is we had very clear communication and we knew like red flags to pay attention to. That if they started if you started having different experiences, like we knew that was a hard stop.
Can you give some
Um,
examples of like what those things might be
yeah.
for somebody?
So for some women, if they have a regular menstrual cycle and if it goes away, like that's a huge flag. Other things can be impaired sleep where you're constantly waking up maybe 3 to 4 a.m. or sleep quality is really bad. If you have a really hyperfixation on foods, like you're finding you're like scrolling more food accounts or you're like constantly thinking about looking at food, you're like imagining all the things that you're going to be eating when you're done. I mean, it becomes like a very big, something that takes up a lot of mental space. If you're constantly sick or if you're like getting injured every time you're in the gym, you feel like you constantly are having something happen, or if you like find that just like cognitively you're not able to perform in work or day-to-day life, those are some of those like things that we look for. And also just wanting to stop before you get to that fuck it moment, like trying to avoid getting to that point where you're just like truly done. And one of the things too with extending is that the life stuff happens. Granted, like we know the time of the year, not what I generally recommend, but even let's say you plan it during an optimal time of the year, if there is such a thing, if life happens, you can always look at that week as, hey, like this is a week where I'm not really expecting to see progress, and I'm gonna just kind of hang out here this week. This week is just we're cruising, just trying to keep things steady. I can be more flexible as I need, and that's okay. So we saw like a few of those moments over the holidays, which is fine, that's human. And creating those or having those weeks where our goal is to be steady. And then also our communication on the things that you and I were looking out for gave a like that good green light to extend by and also having a clear definition of, hey, like, we can't keep going because there's always, when you're seeing progress, especially like when you start to get to the tail end of your deficit, and if you have some brain space still there to keep going, it is very tempting to one more week, one more week, one more week. What can I do in one more week? And then you don't want to stop. So having that like very firm deadline is very important. So that does not happen. And then you're not like trying to diet for several more months.
I think what I really appreciated was knowing that we had this deadline because right in that last month, I actually had so much going on socially. We had a bunch of people staying with us, and it was so hard not to lose my shit on little things that typically would
Mhm.
not bother me. Knowing that deadline was there, it kind of felt okay. This is the photo shoot. This is the big game. This is the event that you have been working towards. And once it's done, we're not going to go back here. Once this is done, we're going to work towards getting up to those maintenance calories again. You can do this a little bit longer and then it's done. And what was awesome about this, like the last month, my body, the amount it changed in that final month, I was like, this was worth it. I took pictures. The first time I took pictures, I was like, who is this? And it was the first time I saw so much definition in my abs. And I was like, I've never had this before. When we had done the last cut, there was definitely definition. I was definitely saw more muscle than I had ever seen before. But this felt different. And I understand that, this stuff is relative. So when I say this is different, the way it's going to impact me is different than, a stranger necessarily looking at my pictures. But I was like, wow, these results are amazing. This surplus was well worth it. And, I really wish I had done something like a DEXA scan before all of this. If I could go back in time, I would have done that because I don't actually know how much muscle mass changed. I see how, I progressed in my lifts. I see how my performance changed. It's funny. I started doing Bulgarian split squats about a year ago. And when I started doing Bulgarian split squats, and granted, this is at the end of a program, like it's not the first lift, but I was doing them with 8 kilos. And now my weight is actually very similar. I'm back in the low 120s and I'm doing double 24 kilos. So to say, things have changed. They have changed even if we don't see like this huge difference. So there's
Mhm.
it's important to see like different markers to track. But coming out of it, I remember thinking to myself, I've never really been that good at the reverse diet. Like last time, there was a lot of emotional stuff going on. The first time I was, in the closet eating food mindlessly to emotionally regulate. And I was like, I'm the healthiest I've ever been from a mental standpoint. I'm going to crush this. And as we're recording this, it's May 23rd. I have been out of a deficit for over 3 months. My weight fluctuates about 3 pounds from the end of the deficit. We ended the deficit around 1,400 calories. I'm eating over 2,100 calories now. And that feels fucking huge. I cannot believe that I get to look this way and eat that much food. And in the midst of all of this, I really have just been like pounding away at the hypertrophy work. There's been sprinkles of strength, there's been sprinkles of power with kettlebell ballistics, but I really went hard on prioritizing the hypertrophy work. And now I'm at a point as I came out of the deficit going into the reverse, I've been focusing more so on strength because I know I'm not eating enough calories to really see that big of a change from a muscle standpoint. And what's so cool is when we ended the deficit, I started working strength and power work back into the mix, kind of putting hypertrophy work on the back burner. And I'm doing some incredible stuff. And I feel so strong. And it's, for me personally, if I could pick, I would have an aesthetic that I have right now, but I would not train hypertrophy because I don't really like it. I love doing things for 3 to 5 reps, whether it is a deadlift, whether it is a snatch, like that's how I like to train. So it's so cool to now be in a phase where that gets to be the focus for a while and seeing the progress and like being in this sweet spot where the food gets to increase, the training gets to change, but the aesthetic, I would say, has been the same for the past 3 months now. And it feels, wow, I finally figured out how the fuck to do this. I wish I grew up with a registered dietitian. I wish I grew up with trainers who just, they just knew more than what I knew at the time. And it's not to be like, what the fuck? It's just, as we grow as professionals, as we grow as people, we just gather new information and it can, change where we end up. And I'm just so grateful, Hillary, that I found you when I found you and you have been able to help me because I feel like a modern day goddess. And when I say that, it's not that I feel like I am a higher power. I just feel like I have so much power when it comes to my personal life. And I understand how food works, I understand how training works, and I understand how to have a flexible versus a fixed mindset around things where I can really just be present with my husband. I can be present with friends. I can be present in my business and I can enjoy my life and feel and look the way I have always wanted. So thank you.
I'm so glad we met over our close birthdays and had a virtual taco date during COVID.
Yeah, that's right.
Who knew that our love of tacos and our birthdays, just a little bit apart, would bring us here today?
Wow.
There's a few things I want to speak a little bit to your maintenance or your coming out of the deficit really quick.
Yes, please, let's do it.
So, a few things that I think were really important and continue to be very important for you as you keep going. One is while you were in the deficit, we did have and build on the conversations of leaving the deficit. So it wasn't something that we saved for later. And that conversation can be kind of challenging to have when you're in the deficit because your brain power is being used to the deficit. So much of it is. And it can be hard to think ahead and, start those conversations. But I think that was really important so that it was more of a transition versus this really abrupt shift. And we were able to make sure that we were clear on what are those behaviors we're leaving in the diet phase. And then also reminding ourselves that coming out of a deficit is hard. Like it is tricky. It's especially the first few weeks is tough because the scale tends to move more, especially as you increase carbohydrates because your muscles at the end of the deficit, they're pretty flat. There's not a lot of glycogen in there. They're hungry. So as you get more carbohydrates, your muscles are getting fuller, which we saw, which was super cool to see. Your muscles like just get nice and full and happy.
Yes.
And what you've also done really well, and I think is so important, is that you have allowed yourself flexibility. We have created moments where you don't track, where you create more space for you to not be in the app in that same way. And you also have really maintained those like very steady and consistent kind of like habits or those foundational pieces with like your meal building and getting your protein and veggies and your nutrition around training has like just stayed so consistent no matter where you're at. And living in that space of, still having the structure and also having that, flexibility to not be as rigid is really difficult because it's hard to go between. But I think our conversations and work has like your openness and your willingness to, try the not tracking or to practice like kind of those mental images of what your meals look like has been really powerful because we have had many days of no tracking or meals that have not tracked. And I think that's a big confidence booster for you. Does that feel that way too?
Absolutely. And I think, something that I would love to share to that is after coming out of the deficit pretty quick, I had a trip going out with Tim for a weekend and I didn't plan to track anything. And when I came back, I saw the scale go up by about 7 pounds. And at the time, I didn't freak out about it because I was thinking to myself, oh, well, glycogen stores, like Hillary said. I thought, oh, I'm eating all of the food out. I know there's a lot of sodium in a lot of the stuff that I typically am not preparing. I was on an airplane, just the way the environment changes things in the body. And I had alcohol. There were all of these reasons as to why the scale would go up. And I feel like for a lot of people, if you see something like that big of a jump, it's easy to be like, I did all of this hard work and I'm going backwards. And instead, what I did is I said, okay, I'm going to go back to eating as I normally would. I'm going to make sure I'm hydrated. I'm going to keep checking in and see what's going on with the scale. And 5 days later, I was back to, the normal place. And I think that's, again, one of the benefits to just continuing to track to see the trends because are you really going to, what would it take to gain 7 pounds in 2 days?
Oh,
I mean, being in a surplus, it didn't happen that quick. Even if I tried, I couldn't do it.
it would take a lot. I think you would be really uncomfortable and really sick. And I'm just like shaking my head because that would just be very unlikely to happen. Like anytime you see shifts like that on the scale, we can largely attribute it to fluids, which things even themselves out. And that was the great point of what you shared. Like you didn't have the screw it moment. You really returned to like normal. You didn't restrict or just say to heck with it. You just kind of went back to those like key things that are important for you.
And I think that's the thing a lot of times, especially if this is your first rodeo, it's easy to get in your head. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important that if you're going to go on a journey like this, you have people that get it, who do know more than you know, to help give you that information to help you realize that the worst case scenario that you think is actually happening right now, it's actually not. And the feelings that you have, I mean, the number on the scale, it's not like you're making this number up. You're seeing it, but there's reasons as to why this is happening. So having that support system is going to be really beneficial for you to do this and feel good about it if it is part of your goals. We're going to be getting ready to wrap this episode in the next couple of minutes. I wish we could do it for longer. But Hillary, is there anything else that you would like to share while we are on this topic?
My biggest takeaway from your experience is the value of playing the long game. And I share that fully recognizing it is not fun, especially like in the beginning when you're making changes, there's this extra work and effort that you're putting forth and not seeing like the big change that you want at first. I mean, it kind of sucks, like to be candid about it, but ultimately gives you the best place to work towards whatever goals that you have because that foundation is kind of like that jumping off point. And working in different phases or having just different timelines can also help so that you don't feel like you're in a diet forever or you're in a surplus forever. You can build on those points in time and then return to your norm.
I think all that's great. I mean, I think sometimes, playing the long game is the shortcut. And from somebody who, did everything the
Mm.
wrong way, trying diets, trying like energy supplements, trying, all of the things that are pushed out on social media saying it's like the quick fix. What I have learned is quick fix is too good to be true. And when you take the time to develop the habits of the person who actually has what it
Mhm.
is you want, like that's when you're going to get it. And having the strong foundation in strength training, having the strong foundation in nutrition, and having a strong foundation, I think, even when it comes to your mental health, are so valuable when this
Yeah.
is a journey that you want to take. It kind of sucks. Sure, there's like moments where it's, I wish I had, what future me is capable of having. But at the same time, there's moments where you get to evolve and become somebody that you've never been. And it can be really fun. Again, like being in the surplus, taking all that time to wear the skirts and the dresses, I feel like that was kind of like a fun thing that I've, taken into this phase of my life. And I don't necessarily know why I'm choosing to bring that piece up right now, but it's fun. You get to learn different things about yourself. And I think it's possible that if this is something that you choose to do, you've never done it before, you might surprise yourself.
I think what you said is perfect. The long game is the shortcut.
If anybody is interested in working with myself or Hillary, I would love to invite you to reach out. Hillary, where's a good place for them to connect with you?
Instagram is a great spot, dietitian.hillary with 2 L's. And my website, nutritionunbound.com, is also a great spot to check out.
If you are interested in connecting with me, you know where to find me. And I'm just going to drip this right now. Me and Hillary are working on something very special. We have a year-long program that is going to be coming out fall of 2025. And if you want to go through a transformation, a year-long transformation with the right support, doing it the right way, nutrition and strength training. We don't have a therapist involved with this, but if you want the support from her and me going through a whole transformation phase, keep your eyes on our stuff. We're toying with a couple of names right now, so I don't want to necessarily say it's one thing or the other, but what I will say is this is going to be a program where there does need to be a level of strength training background. And I would really love for anybody coming into this space also has some type of an understanding of tracking to an extent. So if this is something that you're interested in doing, Swing to Snatch is going to be starting up this summer. That's a great place to get the strength training foundation with kettlebells and begin tracking. Hillary is a part of that program with me. It's a really nice jumping off point. And if you already have a solid foundation in strength training, if you're already familiar with macros to some extent, would love to welcome you into the program as well. But keep your eyes peeled because we are looking to make magic. Thanks for tuning in. If this episode hit home, don't forget to leave a rating and review. Women are stronger together, so share this with a woman who you want to see rise. When we embrace positive takeaways, we level up, and when we share them, we change the world. Follow us on Instagram at The Dangerous Women Podcast and let us know what you want to hear next. And remember, dangerous women redefine wellness and the world. So be fierce, be authentic, be dangerous.